welcome to the Sustainable Business Series. I'm Emily Stubbs, Senior Policy and Projects Manager at Greater Birmingham Chamber of Commerce. And in this Q&A session, I'm joined by Anna Bright, Chief Executive Officer at Sustainability West Midlands. Sustainability West Midlands is the sustainability champion for the West Midlands, a not-for-profit company that works with members across the private, public and third sectors. Anna, thank you for participating in the session today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you.
So to begin with some jargon busting, we hear the phrase everywhere, but what does net zero actually mean, and what do net zero targets mean for businesses?
Okay, so I think if we start with what net zero is, so we are pretty certain the science suggests that man-made emissions of greenhouse gases are significantly contributing to the rate of climate change. So these gases, they can include carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide, probably heard of those, and there's some others as well. And we produce those when we generate energy, when we transport ourselves and our goods with cars and lorries, and they're also generated by industry. So all of the science confirms that these emissions are contributing to global warming and the extremes of weather that we see with that. So we're all, being familiar with the heat waves that we've seen in recent years, flooding, which we, often experience across the winter months, and storm events. So if we are going to minimise the rate of global warming and therefore climate change and those extremes of weather, we need to measure and reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And that's really at the heart of net zero. So the definition of net zero itself is when those man-made emissions of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere are balanced by removals over a specified time period. Now, businesses on an organisational basis can adopt that approach. They can set a target for their own organisation to reduce their emissions over a set time, perhaps have a target date for being net zero. Now, what that usually means is that they will take action across the business to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but often will be left with a residual amount of emissions that really can't be avoided by their operations. Once they get to that stage, they may need to offset those emissions, and you're probably familiar with the term offsetting. What that means is they will take action outside the boundary of their organisation to counterbalance those emissions. Put simply, they'll probably pay for others to reduce emissions or absorb carbon to compensate for their own emissions. And we've all heard of, the international tree planting schemes that, are quite high profile. Now, whilst offsetting often has to be a part of an organisation's approach, if that is done without genuinely focusing on emission reduction, it's avoiding the issue, really. And when we think of some of those international tree planting initiatives, their impact on local communities, on land use and so on, we can actually be contributing to other issues overseas. So the heart of net zero is really to focus on reducing those emissions and only to think about offsetting where it's absolutely unavoidable, and if possible to think about more local offsetting initiatives, of which there are more and more starting to take shape now.
I was going to say, on the kind of reporting and framework, could you tell us a bit about what scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions are, and whether there are any kind of standards that organisations should follow?
Yeah, no problem. So the scopes of emissions, we've got scope 1, 2 and 3, and these are defined by something called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So worth having a look at that. The simplest way to think about them is that scope 1 emissions are direct emissions from your organisation. Scope 2 and 3 are indirect, and I'll set out a bit more about what that means. So scope 1 is greenhouse gas emissions from sources either owned or directly controlled by your business. And to think about that, it's really, it's easy to think about things like fuel that's consumed by your owned and leased company vehicles, or refrigerants perhaps that are used within the business. So that's your direct emissions, and that's your scope 1. Scope 2, again, is fairly straightforward. This is indirect greenhouse gas emissions from purchased energy. So this could be from the generation of purchased electricity, heat, cooling, or steam that is consumed by your business. Scope 3 is where it gets more complex. So again, this is your indirect greenhouse gas emissions, but these are attributed to your activities, but from sources that aren't owned or directly controlled by your business. So this can include products and services that you purchase. It can include waste generated in your operations. It can include business travel, including remote working. And you can see that from those definitions, scope 3 is often very hard for a business to quantify, because you're often relying on other businesses in your supply chain for that information. So it is quite a complex area. Now, in terms of reporting on this, whether or not you have to report, the extent of your reporting, I should say, really depends on the size and type of your business, whether you're a UK-based company and whether you're listed on the stock exchange, and the amount of energy you consume. So generally, the bigger the organisation, the more energy it consumes, the more onerous those reporting requirements will be. Reporting on scope 1 and 2 is often mandatory for businesses. Scope 3 generally remains the most voluntarily to report, but actually is often the area of emissions where you will have the biggest impact as a business. So what we would say is, even if you're not mandated to report on these emissions, it is really good business practice to start thinking about this, and to perhaps start thinking about targets and reporting anyway. And there's lots of benefits to that. If you're starting to look at, for example, your energy consumption, how that's being used across the business, and the way that you use resources, you're probably going to find ways to do things more efficiently. And then, of course, you're going to cut your costs. So it really does make good business sense to have a look at how you're using energy and resources. If you have a look at that, you're probably also going to understand the way that your business is exposed to future risks. So we've all seen energy prices increase over the last year or so. If you can bring your energy consumption down, you're going to be less impacted by those increases in prices, and you're going to be more resilient. You might be able to think about renewables on site, which again increases your resilience to external factors. So there's those fundamental bottom line impacts that can be achieved. It's also a really positive thing when it comes to PR and engagement. So if you can show that you're looking at your emissions and perhaps sustainability more broadly, it can help with trust with your customers and your clients, with your employees. It can help with your brand, and it can also help if you're a business that is bidding for contracts. You will often have to, to start setting out how you're approaching emissions reduction and what your general approach to sustainability is. And if you're doing this and you can put this in your bids, it's going to set you apart from your competitors. So even if you're not obliged to do it, I would recommend that you start to think about it anyway.
Absolutely. I think it's something that a lot of people are thinking about in their personal lives, how they can reduce their energy consumption, maybe reduce their waste in their homes. So it's
absolutely. And I think, we're all used to doing that at home, aren't we? And if we can take that into the business, and even if it's not our role, if we can go to the decision maker and say, look, at home, we separate these materials for recycling. We've got a smart meter and we're looking at how we use energy. What can we take from that at home and apply within the business? It's also worth being aware of the different frameworks that are out there to help businesses on this journey. So there is an initiative called the Science-Based Targets Initiative. Now, That is an initiative whereby an organisation can work with the SBTI, and they can work on a target. It has to be science-based, there has to be evidence behind it. They can then get that accredited or verified by the SBTI, and then they start to report against that. And it's a globally recognised initiative, which really does provide a good structure to work through. For businesses that are SMEs, there is a more streamlined approach, which means, it's a little bit less onerous. The need to focus on scope 3 is a little bit less rigorous than it is for your larger businesses. So that is absolutely worth looking at. And the Carbon Trust also have a net zero standard. So again, that's helping organisations to measure and manage their emissions, helping to lead into their carbon reduction strategies and set targets, and there is support available through both of those initiatives. They're both obviously national, and again there's more local support available, and hopefully I can tell you a bit more about that as we chat.
Definitely. I was just about to get onto that question, actually. Sustainability West Midlands, obviously sustainability champions for the region. How do you support businesses throughout this kind of transition to net zero? It's obviously a bit of a mountain, I think, for a lot of businesses to climb, but what support is there at a local level?
Well, there is a lot. I mean, I hope any business that's watching this does take that as some comfort. So we have been around for 21 years now, based in Birmingham, but we work across the whole of the West Midlands. Now, we're a membership organisation, and we've got about 170 members now, cross-sector, so it does include public sector and third sector, but the biggest proportion of our members are businesses. Now, we get to know those businesses really well. If they need support on their approach to net zero and sustainability, we can help with that. Equally, if they've got a product or a service that's going to help other organisations, we'll raise the profile of that. So we've got a real appreciation of what the challenges are for businesses, and how they can learn from us, but more importantly, how they can learn from each other to become more sustainable. So we're really happy to share that expertise. One thing that we provide, and we do this on behalf of the West Midlands Combined Authority, is we manage the West Midlands Net Zero Business Pledge. Now, you've got some fantastic national initiatives, but this is an initiative focused on our region. It's for any business, no matter what stage of their journey they're at. So they can be at the very early stages of thinking of net zero, but as long as they can say, we know this is important and we're starting to take action, they are welcome to make the pledge. Equally, if they've been doing this for years and made good progress, we welcome them as well. There's no cost to making the pledge. It's a simple online form. And once you've made your pledge, you'll be able to benefit from free support from Sustainability West Midlands. We'll connect you with other pledge businesses. There's a really great new website which showcases all the pledge businesses. And we run quarterly drop-ins for those pledge businesses, so they can come along, speak to other businesses, ask those difficult questions, how are you approaching this? How have you got support? So it really is, I think there's no catch. Make the pledge if this is something that's important to your business. And then finally, our website. I mean, it really is a mine of useful information. We've got events on there, not just our own events that the Chamber are doing, events that other organisations in the region are providing, where you can go along and learn about this, improve your knowledge, get help and support. The new Business Support Hub, Business Growth West Midlands, has just launched, so that should be a really good place for any business to go and talk about their needs, not just on sustainability, more broadly as well, and they'll be able to signpost you to support and any funding that might be available, and there is funding out there for things like capital investment and so on. And we also run webinars ourselves, so they'll be on our website. We share them in the newsletter. There is loads of support on this. So, if this is an issue for your business and you're really struggling to know where to start, please do contact Sustainability West Midlands, and I'm 100% sure we can help.
Thank you, Anna, ever so much for some hugely insightful answers that I think will provide a lot of valuable insight to the business community that we worked with. Obviously, we're huge fans of kind of peer-to-peer networking and working together to solve some of these big problems and big challenges. I've got a whole list of resources that you've mentioned here, from Greenhouse Gas Protocol, science-based targets and initiatives, Carbon Trust Net Zero Standard, and then also, like you said, at a local level, of course, Sustainability West Midlands, the West Midlands Net Zero Business Pledge, and Business Growth West Midlands, which, like you say, has just launched and is a really, really important resource for the region. Thank you for joining me on the podcast, on the Q&A.
Thank you for having me.
I'd also like to thank our sponsors, University College Birmingham and Lloyds Bank. Thanks to their support, all of the Sustainable Business Series events, webinars and digital content are free to access for the whole business community. And to our listeners, please don't forget to register for all of the Sustainable Business Series events and webinars on the Chamber website.